Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're infiltrating the Institute in search of our son Shaun in Fallout 4. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Virgil was a scientist at the Institute who decided their experiments had gone too far for him. After sabotaging the project he was working on, he fled into the wasteland and made his way to the one place he assumed no one in their right mind would come looking: the glowing sea. This particular area is flooded with radiation from the bomb that was dropped there 2 centuries prior, and it isn't the worst place to hide out if you've got the ability to survive. In Virgil's case, the ability to survive meant transforming himself into a super mutant, using serum he'd developed as part of the FEV project he'd been a part of during his life in the Institute. We'll get more into that project in a bit, but as he tells us what we're going to need to do to get into his former home, he asks that we try to recover a possible cure for his affliction when we finally do get inside. Agreeing to help him seems like the logical thing here, if only for the fact that it's doubtful that he would help us if we refused. Whether we should help him out or not, though, is a matter that we can debate when the time comes. For now, Virgil gives us some info on how to track a special type of Institute synth known as a courser, as we're going to need a chip from one of them to teleport ourselves into the facility. Tracking the thing down isn't too difficult, and even killing it isn't too tough for us. And we're soon working on finding someone who can help us decode the courser chip so that we can actually use it. The first stop is a visit to our old friend Dr. Amari, but she doesn't have the expertise we need and instead points us in the direction of a group known as the Railroad. Like the Institute, the Railroad is a secretive organization, though they work on the opposite end of the line, trying to free synths rather than recapture them. The only clue we're given on how to find them is to follow the Freedom Trail, and it turns out the Freedom Trail isn't just some in-game gimmick. The real-world Freedom Trail is a physical line in Boston, Massachusetts that takes visitors to a variety of locations that hold some importance in colonial American history. From historic churches to places like the building where the Boston Tea Party was planned, and the location of the Boston Massacre that would wind up kickstarting what would eventually become the American Revolution, the Freedom Trail is a trove of history. And the line shows up in the game as well. We can follow along, finding the markers for the historic locations along the route as we battle super mutants, ghouls, and raiders in the streets. But just following the trail isn't enough, as we have to also pay attention to the markers along the way, with each having a number painted on the surface and an arrow pointing to a letter in the phrase Boston, the Freedom Trail. Our journey along the path ends at the Old North Church, where Robert Newman and Captain John Pulling Jr. climbed to the tower of the church on April 18, 1775, to hang 2 lanterns that signaled the arrival of British troops by sea to awaiting Paul Revere. Honestly, it's kind of a shame the game didn't lean a little more into the history of Boston in the story. There are some great things like the story of Paul Revere and the Boston Tea Party that could have made for excellent teaching points. But I'm glad they at least included some of the historic information on things like the plaque outside of the church. Moving into the church, we wind up going down into the crypt below the building and following it until we reach a seal that helps unlock a secret door. The seal turns and can be pressed, and it becomes quickly apparent the seals we found marked along the trail were giving us the passphrase we need here. And let's just take a second to appreciate the simplicity that this secret organization applies to hiding themselves. We'll find out later that they've been a real thorn in the side of the Institute for a while, stealing and reprogramming synths for likely the past few years at least. and directions to their home base, along with the password to get in, were just plastered on the sidewalk for anyone to find. And it's not like we need someone to point us here, as it's possible to stumble onto their hideout before being told about it. So how in the world have they been able to hide from the highly sophisticated, technologically superior Institute this whole time? We've got to really wonder how smart the people who run the Institute are if they couldn't find something so simple. To make matters worse, the passphrase is railroad. The code to break into the organization known as the Railroad is railroad. It's clear at this point that we're dealing with the best and brightest the Commonwealth has to offer between these two secretive groups. Brushing that aside, we come face to face with the leader of the Railroad, Desdemona, who apparently rushed to the entrance to the underground bunker as soon as we opened the door, greeting us with a fancy display of lights and bravado. She's acting like some kind of big shot, though I'll call her leadership into question as she doesn't seem to know anything at all about us, despite our exploits in the Commonwealth, and the fact that one of her people, Deacon, has been tracking us specifically for a while. Now, maybe Deacon just hasn't had a chance to brief her on what we've been up to, but shouldn't she at least have some clue as to what's been going on? We helped the Minutemen take back the castle, have been gallivanting around the wasteland for at least a little while at this point, and we just walked right up to their front door without so much as a single guard to stop or question us. How does this organization function in any way with that lack of leadership? Desdemona should be up to date on everything going on, with operatives like Deacon providing daily status reports and updates. She should be organizing and planning defenses and moves against the group that they're actively fighting. Instead, she's just chilling in the basement, playing like she's some kind of hero fighting for the greater good of Synth kind. And on top of everything, they'll only assist with decoding the courser chip if we agree to give it to them when they're done. I went through all of the trouble of tracking down how the Institute gets coursers in and out of their facility, finding Virgil in the glowing sea, tracking and killing a courser, and you're telling me that you should get the spoils of my effort? Now, to be fair, they are the only ones who can analyze the chip, and they do deserve some kind of reward for that. But they act so entitled, and I'm not exactly thrilled to be working with them because of that attitude. Given the situation, Desdemona and the Railroad at large should be more open to working with us without the demands. We've done something in only a matter of days that they haven't managed to do in the course of years, and you would think they would be ready to give up anything just to have us on their side. I'm going to jump forward a bit here because, as part of this whole process, Desdemona tells us that she wants in on any plan we have to access the Institute and requests that we come back to speak with her before doing anything else. As I'm not a fan of her attitude, I wound up making my way into the belly of the beast with the help of my Minutemen, and upon returning to tell the Railroad what I found, Des isn't happy.
Get out of here.
We've heard some very disturbing things about you. That you've been to the Institute. That you're actually working with those monsters. You're lucky we don't shoot you on sight.
But I want to help you guys.
Far too little, far too late. There's no way we can trust you now. Get the hell out of here, and don't come back.
She says it's an issue of not being able to trust us since we're now working with the Institute. But in reality, we're seeing in real time why the Railroad is one of the worst groups in the game. Ignoring for a second their lax security, they're actively turning away the one chance they have to actually stop the Institute. They can pretend all day that we just aren't trustworthy, but in reality, they should know better. Deacon spent all of that time following us around. He knows a good deal about us and who we are, and at a bare minimum, they should be asking us questions about our trip into the Institute and trying to learn whatever they can about it. Instead, they're banning us from their secret fort and assuming that action won't come back to bite them later. Think about it for just 1 second. Even if the player character is the enemy, wouldn't you want to keep them close? We already know how to get into their base. We've shown an aptitude for overcoming tough obstacles, and we're incredibly resourceful. Building bad will against us doesn't exactly bode well for the future of your organization. You'd be better off kidnapping the family of Brian Mills than going against the sole survivor at this point. But now, we'll move on from the failures of the Railroad and focus on our actual target for this video, the Institute. Getting back to Virgil, we report our success and get some hand-drawn plans for a machine that will most likely work perfectly well to transport us into the underground facility. Though before sharing the plans with us, he shares his opinion on the group that helped us decode the Corsair chip in the first place.
Oh God, those kooks. I would have expected they'd be too busy trying to liberate vending machines or setting computer terminals free. Sorry, they just have something of a reputation.
Taking the plans back to Sturgis at Sanctuary Hill, we're able to build the machine, and in the blink of an eye, we're standing inside the most advanced building in the world. After downloading some data from the unguarded computer terminal right outside the relay area, we make our way to an elevator in the next room. And, just briefly, why is this room not occupied by anyone at all? This is the room used to transport people, mainly Corsairs and their hostages, back and forth from the Institute. And you're telling me that they don't have anyone staffing it? Maybe it's automated, but then why is it set up as if there needs to be someone here? I know it's kind of nitpicky, but it just seems so irresponsible to have a place like this set up with no one around to handle transportation or to monitor the system. Why is the terminal even there if it isn't needed? Whatever the reason, it works out for us as we're able to just stroll in and make our way through the area unimpeded. Even though there's no guards to stop us, we are being watched, as a voice comes through a hidden speaker to let us know our intrusion wasn't as sneaky as we thought. Following the voice's instructions, we wind up coming face to face with an old man named Father. He greets us as we're trying to calm down what turns out to be a synth named Shaun. And as if the situation couldn't get any wilder, Father himself is actually our son, and now I feel like we're trapped in a country song. Joking aside, it turns out the time between Shaun being taken and our more recent thawing was about 60 years. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, let's look at the situation on the whole, because in reality, we don't even know for sure that this actually is Shaun. Now, okay, in the game files and for the sake of the story in the game, it absolutely is Shaun, but let's take a step back and pretend for one moment that we're in the real-life shoes of the player protagonist. We were rushed into a vault moments before the world came to a crashing end, and shoved into a chamber that cryogenically froze us for an unspecified period of time. At some point, we were unfrozen just long enough to see our son kidnapped and our wife killed before being put back on ice for another unknown amount of time. When we finally unfroze for the second time and emerged from the vault, we learned that we were more or less asleep for about 210 years. A time verified by several independent sources. We're able to track down the man who stole our son, but he isn't actually too helpful, only telling us the child is a bit older than we expected. We know that he was seen with a boy that was about 10 years old, but there's no way to know with any degree of certainty if that was the real Shaun or the synth Shaun that we see when we first meet Father. We don't know when the last time Kellogg saw the real Shaun was either, as he's usually traipsing around the surface doing their dirty work. So here we are, confronted by this old man who claims to be our flesh and blood son. It's possible he is the real Shaun, but it's also possible that he's a synth himself, or even someone else entirely. In a real situation, we would be best served to ask these questions and remain on our toes, though that might be easier said than done. There's a good chance the Institute has some ulterior motive for making us think that Shaun was the one standing in front of us. Maybe they want to further their research that they started with the boy. Maybe they are curious to see how this kind of manipulation of human emotions would play out so they can adjust the programming in their synths to compensate for some specific set of circumstances. The truth is that we don't know what they really want, but they sure know what we're looking for. This whole introduction was orchestrated to play with our emotions. They knew that we were looking for a young child, the son that we'd lost in the vault. Us going through Kellogg's memories was helpful to them because it introduced the idea that the boy might be a little older, but still the son that we could connect with. Now we find out that he's actually lived his entire life as we've been frozen in time, and their hope would likely be that we would still be open to having a connection with him for one reason or another. And that's no accident either, as Father even mentions how we were willing to accept the 10-year jump, meaning we should be able to accept an additional 50 years by default. Let's bring this into the real world to learn something useful from the experience. Many of us have been faced at one time or another with a friend or family member that might have used similar tactics to get something from us. Maybe they wanted money, or to be involved in our lives in some way that they weren't already. Perhaps they were looking for something more. While not every relationship is toxic like that, it's always smart to pay attention and work to spot the times when things seem off. This is especially true when it comes to close familial relationships that are more one-sided most of the time. This might involve someone who is abusive or manipulative, who withholds affection or attention until they need or want something for themselves. If you can learn to spot that behavior through honest reflection, you can often wind up getting yourself out of a bad situation before it begins. Looking directly at the situation with our player character and father, it would be incredibly difficult as a parent to find out that you had missed your child's entire life through the actions of an entity like the Institute, and the first instinct would be to want to make up for that time. Having the wherewithal and fortitude to actually question the situation would be incredibly difficult. Our entire goal to this point, everything that we've done, has been to reach this moment and find Shaun. If we're being told the man standing before us is Shaun, going against that would mean that all of our effort was for nothing, and potentially that something happened to the boy along the way, meaning there would be no chance of seeing him again. Accepting it means that we can have the peace of mind that we accomplished our goal and allows us to live with an artificial happiness. But that's just the tip of this iceberg. Let's dive into the Institute's use of Kellogg and Father's view of the world above ground. Starting with Kellogg, he was obviously in use by the Institute when Shaun was taken. And if we assume the man standing before us is Shaun, that means that both the Institute and Shaun saw fit to continue using the ruthless mercenary despite his less than ideal methods of working. He admitted to doing some horrible things over the course of his life, and he didn't need to shoot our spouse in the cryopod when he came for Shaun. On top of that, Father tells us that he was happy to see us take out Kellogg, insinuating that our path crossed with his on purpose, and meaning that this whole thing was left up to the slim chance that we would be able to handle a battle-hardened mercenary that no one else in the Commonwealth, including the Institute itself, had been able to take out. That seems like an awful big risk to take. Father also justifies the use of Kellogg by asking if we would have preferred that they would have set him loose on the Commonwealth to do harm as he saw fit, insisting that they kept the collateral damage to a minimum by keeping him on a short leash. But it goes even further than that because they also fitted him with technology that enhanced his physical capabilities and prolonged his life beyond what it should have been. So either they made him a killing machine that even they couldn't have handled, meaning the chance of us beating him was even lower than initially thought, or they kept using him even when they had the ability to take him off the battlefield, meaning any damage he did lies squarely on their shoulders. We also dip briefly into Father's views on the Commonwealth as a whole. He, and as we soon find out most of the scientists in the Institute, thinks the wasteland is a lost cause. They view their mission inside the Institute as humanity's last hope for survival, while also refusing to actually help any of those outside of their walls. This seems rather counterproductive if they truly want to be a force for good. But it doesn't get any better as we actually get the chance to explore the place and meet the heads of the departments. There are 4 main departments that we can dig into, though there's only a couple I really want to talk about here. Taking a trip to the Bioscience Division, we wander off the beaten path in search of the serum Virgil asked us to retrieve from his lab. He worked on a project known as the FEV program, short for Forced Evolutionary Virus Program. The aim of this experiment seems to have been to figure out the way the FEV worked and potentially use it in some way in the Commonwealth, though there isn't a completely clear answer as to what they really wanted. They were experimenting on humans, injecting them with the virus and monitoring the outcome, with the vast majority of those cases resulting in super mutants that were then released into the wasteland. As far as I can tell, it looks like the test subjects were likely individuals they abducted from the Commonwealth, with some of those individuals no doubt being replaced by synths over the years. Virgil grew uneasy after running the program for a while with no new results and no indication of what they were looking for, and he wound up causing a ton of damage to it before fleeing the facility, ultimately resulting in the shuttering of the whole thing. Outside of FEV, bioscience is really made up of what you might expect, with a variety of plants and even synthetic animals being created as possible food sources for humanity. This would be great if they were actually using the tests that they were running to benefit the hungry residents of the Commonwealth, but they aren't doing that. As a matter of fact, we can find evidence in one of the terminals that they are actively doing harm to the residents of the wasteland. Case in point, a study being conducted on the Warwick Homestead, a settlement you can actually find in the southeast corner of the Commonwealth, but one that I've not yet been to in this playthrough. They've abducted and replaced the family patriarch, Roger Warwick, and they're using the synth replacement to monitor and control their experiment. Not only that, the plan, once the experiment is complete, is to cleanse all surface-level evidence of the tests, presumably meaning they plan to wipe out the homestead and everyone in it. Now, and I cannot stress this enough, this entire project is not only unethical by a wider margin than anything Vault-Tec might have done, but it's also completely unnecessary. Just start your own farm, filled with synths and some synth protectors, and carry out the experiments to your heart's content. There's no need to kill a man and replace him. taking on the risk associated with that action when you could just as easily set up the whole thing someplace else? And you can't even argue it's something about the soil in that particular area, because unless that is the only place in the world with that specific soil, you can find or even replicate the properties of the soil in another spot. And doing that might even be better if you're looking for results that will bear fruit outside of that farm. If you absolutely need to use that area, just send in a small group of synths to befriend the Warwicks and offer assistance with the farm. That would even allow you the chance to disappear later with no trace of the experiment left behind when you choose. It took all of 2 minutes to come up with both of those ideas, and I presume the Institute scientists are at least as smart as I am, probably even smarter, and they had nothing but time to come up with ideas and plan accordingly. It's clear ethics aren't really something that they care about, though. The other two areas I want to really dive into are the Synth Retention Bureau and robotics. Starting with the Synth Retention Bureau, or SRB, we meet a man with a familiar name, Dr. Justin Ao. You'll remember that name from the last episode where we discovered it on the Mayor of Diamond City's console. He's been sending a courier to Diamond City to meet with the mayor every couple of weeks, and it would seem that Piper might not be so far off in her reporting. Even if the mayor isn't a synth himself, he's clearly been in contact with the Institute in some way, though the full story will have to wait. Dr. Ao, just like about everyone else in the Institute, sees the rogue synths that they've been dealing with as nothing more than machines gone haywire. As far as they're concerned, the synths aren't becoming sentient. They're malfunctioning and being hacked and reprogrammed by the railroad, and they need to be recovered and reset at all costs. This mindset can even be found in the place where the synths are born, robotics. Though, that's also where we can find evidence of doubt brewing in at least one scientist.
If it were just a limb twitching at her hand, but her eyes were moving as well. Involuntary twitching and rapid eye movements while sleeping.
Theoretical limits are made to be broken.
You just don't want to admit to yourself what it is.
If you're about to launch into one of your
Good to see you.
impassioned speeches about artificial sentience and machines with souls, I've heard enough of them by now. Hell, I could write them down from
But we
memory.
can't just ignore the question. If a synth can dream, why can't it have a soul? And if a synth has a soul, then it is a living person by every standard we can. Of course it is far more comfortable to think of them as machines, so we can do what we want with
If you
them.
disapprove of the work we do here, Dr. Renee, you know where to find the
Now,
talent.
just a moment. I never said that. I'm simply trying to open everyone's eyes to new possibilities.
Well, it's an
I hear we're
unwanted
about to get a new
distraction.
food
We're men of
supplement.
science, not philosophers. You do well to remember that.
And it's that last piece, where the doctor on the left, Max Loken, mentions that they are men of science and not philosophers, that I really want to look at, because he's wrong. Science and philosophy go hand in hand. They always have, even when the majority of scientists and philosophers didn't realize it. Both disciplines are focused on the questions that few others are willing to answer, with science working on how the world works while philosophy dives into the why. Both the how and the why are important if we're going to make groundbreaking discoveries and maintain ethical principles. Scientific research into how to build machines that look and act like humans can help you make robots, synths, and androids. But we cannot ethically release those creations into the world until we've taken the time to ask why we would create them in the first place, and what we plan to do with them. If the goal is to create a machine to help do the heavy lifting, to ease the burden on humans and make life better for humanity overall, then why should we progress beyond basic robots? Where are the lines that we shouldn't cross in our pursuit of knowledge? How will we know when we've crossed those lines? We've talked before about sentience and what makes a being deserving of rights, when we covered Detroit Become Human. So I'm not going to rehash that conversation here. Go check out that series if you haven't already, because the discussion is one worth having. Unlike the androids in Detroit, however, these synthetic humans being created in the Institute are indistinguishable from humans, save a small processor implanted in their brain. This is the core of who they are from a programming standpoint, and is only accessible once a synth has been killed, meaning that while it is still alive, there is no way to tell the difference between it and a regular human. This raises some interesting questions, like whether synths would be able to reproduce, or if they would be compatible with humans in that capacity since they share DNA. But that concept is never breached within the confines of the game. If they could reproduce, one could probably make an argument for introducing them to the Commonwealth and the world at large to help grow the population and rebuild the world. Coupled with the advancements in food production and synthetic animals, the Institute really could be the brightest hope for the future of mankind. But as it stands, they are seen as nothing more than property. And after we've acquainted ourselves with the leaders of each of the divisions, Father sends us on our first official outing as part of the Institute. This particular mission shows the ignorance of both the Institute and the Railroad, as we're to recover a synth that went rogue, and then had its memory wiped by the Railroad before taking over a group of raiders that's been responsible for robberies and deaths in the Commonwealth. For starters, the actions of the synth aren't really that far off from the actions of any other random wastelander. There are plenty of raider groups being run by non-synths, and if the Institute was actually worried about things like this, they wouldn't have released super mutants into the wasteland, and would be concerned with cleaning that mess up more than trying to recover their property. The Railroad's involvement here is even worse, because rather than just leaving well enough alone, or simply assisting synths, they choose to wipe the memory of the synths they come into contact with, and then send them back out into the wasteland with a new identity and no idea that they are synths. Just imagine the crisis a synth could have if it thought it was a regular human, and then somehow found out it was actually a synth the whole time. It could have a meltdown and do any number of things, and that blood would be on the hands of the Railroad. Yes, we'll be talking more about that next week, so just put a pin in it. We managed to recover the rogue synth despite my best effort, and after a quick visit with Father back at the Institute, we find ourselves heading to a place known as Bunker Hill, where another group of rogue synths is being protected by some Railroad agents who are trying to get them safely out of the city. And this time, we actually have a say in the outcome, as we can choose to just take out the courser Father sent along to assist us and set the synths free. This doesn't go over well when we meet back up with Father on top of the Commonwealth Institute of Technology building that sits on top of the Institute, and we have a decision to make. On the one hand, we could apologize for our error and beg for forgiveness, hoping Father will accept what we did and let us back in. But I can't do that in good conscience. See, the path that seems to be the best here would be to work our way up inside the Institute and try to enact change from the inside. This is something that happens all too often in our own world, where people wind up staying with and enabling organizations that do more harm than good in the hope of making things better when they finally reach a position of power. Of course, this never actually happens because the reality is that changing systems for the better from the inside takes a concerted effort by a large group. One person seldom makes enough of a difference to matter, and in the end the effort fails despite the best intentions of the individual. That's how good people can wind up doing awful things in the name of doing the greater good. Maybe I have to poison a river or overlook some safety protocols today, but it's alright because when I'm in charge things will be different. But even if that day ever comes, you find yourself buried in bureaucracy and unable to actually do what you wanted. And because of that, I choose to stand up to the bully rather than join them. It won't be easy, but we'll be able to use some of the connections that we've been building up to take down the boogeyman and save the Commonwealth. How exactly are we going to do that? Well, if you hit the like button on this video and subscribe to Lost in Games, you'll find out next week as we meet the Brotherhood of Steele, find out what Preston Garvey really stands for, and show Father who his daddy is. Channel members and patrons get the chance to see videos early and have their name put on the screen, and you can join their ranks by using the links below. Signing up for either of those things really helps me out when it comes to getting new games to cover and adding storage space so I can keep all of my recordings organized. With that, I want to thank you all for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.